can be pretty overwhelming to decide on where to study, even after you've come up with your list of countries that you're interested in. Well, don't worry, because our next session called Forging Your College List is here to help. So, in this workshop, the speaker will talk about her personal experience creating her college list. She will discuss the different aspects she had to consider and the factors that affected her decision to add certain colleges to her college list. I hope you're ready to join us as we delve into engaging discussions, informative talks, and unlock a world of endless possibilities at CAM Study Abroad Conference, brought to you by LIMS Review Center, the Princeton Review Philippines, AUG Philippines, and AUCC Philippines. Now, before we proceed with the talk, let's lay down the house rules once more para aware yung mga kakasali lang and also to refresh everyone who came from the previous sessions. Firstly, please do not spam the Q&A box or send any inappropriate messages. And second, everyone at camp is working very hard to make your conference experience amazing. Please be respectful at all times. How to ask questions? All questions must be sent in the Q&A box. Questions in the chat box might get lost in all the messages. And these format your questions like this: name and then question. So now that we've tackled the house rules, I will introduce our esteemed speaker for this session. Maya Tuviera is an incoming freshman at the University of Notre Dame. She is a Hesper Musical Scholar and a Glenn Family Honors Scholar who intends to major in economics and political science. She is the current president of Camp Philippines, a regular contributor to the Philippine Star, and a leader at several nonprofits. After applying to nearly 20 universities, Maya is here today to share her insight regarding the do's and don'ts of creating your college list. Everyone, a round of applause to our very own Maya Tuviera. Hi, Maya. Can you please turn
Hi,
on your
Rheign.
cam? Hi.
Yeah, can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, so
perfect.
without further ado, I'll hand over the virtual mic to Maya.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Rheign. And hello, everyone. I'm super excited to see all of you again for the second time today. Today, I'm going to be discussing how to forge your college list. So, just a brief introduction to me. Like Rheign mentioned, I'm an economics and political science double major at Notre Dame. I'm also a Hesburgh USCO Merit Scholar and Glenn Family Honor Scholar, which I will be discussing more later on. I'm the current president of CAMP, long time camper. I've been participating in camp since grade 7 or 8. I also write for the Philippine Star. And then as for my background in terms of like the Philippines, I graduated with honors in the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program from ICA. So that's a local school, but it did like ICA did offer international curriculum. And I applied to universities in the US, UK, and Philippines. And those are my fun facts. Yeah. All right. So, what is a college list? I think it's very self explanatory, but essentially, a college list is the list of universities that you plan to apply to. And I think more than what is a college list, I think an important question is why you should have a college list. Because I know a lot of people who didn't really necessarily decide, okay, I'm going to plan to apply to these 5 colleges and that will be it. I think a lot of people that I know kind of went along with the flow. Let's say they weren't happy with the results from their US universities. They then decided to apply to Australian universities because the Australian universities have a later deadline, something like that. So while that is an option that you can definitely consider, I think that forming a college list is a much more organized way to go about the application process. It allows you to decide early on where you want to be, and it allows you to know, what kind of research do you have to do with regard to location, the institutions, etc. So just a brief college list lexicon. So there are some terms that I'm going to be using in this presentation that may not be familiar to all of you. A lot of these, especially the latter ones, would kind of be more specific to US schools, although some other countries do use the system as well. So firstly, a reach school. So a reach school is a school at which your stats are below those of the average accepted student. Let's say you have a 1480 SAT and like a 3.6 GPA, and a school has an average 3.9 and 1580. In that case, that school would be a reach for you because your chances of admission are not necessarily very high when you look at the admitted student profile. And then there's also target schools at which you're basically schools in which your stats match that of the traditional accepted student. Now, this doesn't necessarily need to be exact. If the average admitted student score on, let's say, the SAT is a 1460 and you have a 1450 or a 1470, that is not going to make it a safety or a reach. Those 10 points won't make or break it. I think depending on the metric that you're using, you could go maybe 30 to 50 points when it comes to SAT. You could go to like 0.2 to 0.4 when it comes to GPA and so on. And lastly, safety schools are where your stats exceed those of the average accepted student. Now, there isn't really a lot of specificity with regard to what schools and what factors you should take into consideration when deciding relative to everything else. What is a reach? What is a target? What is a safety? It's not super specific and there's no formula. This is really honestly up to you and your personal assessment of the situation. So it's really important to do a lot of research so that you can be realistic about your choices of admission. And then the next we have early decision, which is binding admission. So basically that means that if you're accepted, you must attend that university and I'm pretty sure they sue you if you don't. You'll have to do research. I personally didn't apply to any school's early decision because I wasn't really ready for that level of commitment. There's also early action, which is non-binding. So that allows you to apply to multiple schools and then you get to decide later on. For a lot of schools, this is during the regular decision date. Like that's the whole point of early action. And then they also have, some schools also have restrictive early action, which is kind of a mix of early decision and early action. So for restrictive early action, one element of it is sometimes the school will limit you to only applying to that school with some exceptions. So for example, Notre Dame offers restrictive early action. By the way, I'm going to be using the colleges that I applied to and was admitted to a lot, like to illustrate examples. This is just so it's clear. I hope you guys understand. And also, a lot of the schools that I applied to are in the US and UK. So I unfortunately won't have that many examples for like Hong Kong, Singapore, and others and schools in Europe and stuff like that. But I do hope that it's clear what I'm talking about when it comes to the other slides, which are going to be quite general. So yeah, one example, Notre Dame offers restrictive early action. And one like feature of restrictive early action is you can't necessarily apply to a lot of other schools early action. You're limited to one school and then maybe a few based on exceptions, such as if you have to apply to a school early in order to get a scholarship. So for the University of Southern California, only students who apply early action are considered for merit scholarship. So in that situation, restrictive early action would likely, though you have to do research, it would likely permit you to to apply to that university early as well. But so that's why it's similar to early decision in that you'll only have that you'll have way less options because early decision you really only apply to one school. And it's similar to early action because you won't also won't necessarily need to give them an answer, but at an earlier date. You will likely be able to reply to your offer of admission during the regular decision deadline as well. So I hope that's clear. If there's any questions with regard to these definitions or terms, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. I will try my best to leave time for questions at the end of this talk. And you, as always, you can message me after. My contact details will be at the end. So I hope that's clear. All right, so now we're moving on to elements of a good college list. So I think broadly, there are three elements that I would strongly suggest that you are very aware of when formulating your college list. Firstly, diversity. I would suggest to look for schools that are diverse in terms of your admissions chances, which is the reach, target, safety categories, location, etc. Now, a lot of you may be very decided, okay, I'm going to go to school in the US, or specifically even I'm going to go to school on the West Coast. Some of you might not be as decided and are willing to look at different kinds of locations. I will explain to you more later on why I think it's important to be open to different kinds of locations. But generally, I would definitely suggest looking for diversity in your choices. You really want choices that are different from one another, especially if you're not the kind of person who has a dream school. So I think it's really important to choose schools that are very different from one another so that you can have a variety of options. Second thing, and like kind of related to the last one, is quantity. So I definitely suggest to curate a list of multiple schools so that you have the luxury of choice. However, I would say not to overload your list. Generally, a question that I am asked a lot, and I'm sure that a lot of you have, is how many colleges should I apply to? And I hate receiving this answer, but the answer really is it depends. So this depends on a number of things. First and foremost, for a lot of people, a huge barrier would be cost. So not only is university abroad expensive, application fees can be expensive as well. In the case of the UK, it is on the cheaper side. You pay, I remember it being less than £30 for 5 schools total. So that is pretty cheap relative to other places. Whereas, for example, in the US, you can end up paying 70 to 80 or more dollars for one single school. So that might be a limiting factor. Another factor that you need to consider is also how many essays, applications, whatever, can you personally manage to fill out? So for me personally, I applied to, I believe, 18 schools, and that was already like immense, and it was very difficult writing all of those essays. And if you struggle with that, I'm sure that the essay panel will be very helpful for you later on in the conference. But I think that definitely you need to assess in your personal capabilities, what can I do? And lastly, I think it's very important to consider, and the third element is quality. So choose schools that you would attend if admitted. This sounds very easy, right? Like, of course, I would go to the school, but a lot of people are blinded by certain factors, and that ends up kind of clouding their judgment in terms of formulating a college list. One of the most common mistakes I see is people will apply to Ivy Leagues or top 20 universities solely because of that prestige factor, and then maybe not realize that that school is not a great fit for them. If you're particular about things like location, student diversity, academic fit, etc., applying to an Ivy League university is not necessarily going to guarantee that you will achieve all of these things, that you will have all of these things that you are satisfied with. You should be choosing universities based on personal preference rather than simply focusing on prestige and the quality or ranking of the school as said by like a random news organization online, right? So those are the elements that I think you should consider when formulating a college list. Now, factors to consider. So these are factors that I think are important for you to consider when choosing what universities to apply to. Let's say, for the sake of this like conversation or this talk, that we are going to be applying to maybe 10 universities or more, right? So that final number, that quantity, will largely depend on how many countries you're interested in being in. So I think that for sure, if you are only interested in applying to schools in the UK, your college list is going to be a lot smaller compared to somebody who is interested in applying to Europe, the US, and the Philippines, right? This person might have 20 or more schools while you will only have 5, just because that's how the UK college or university application system works. So that's definitely going to be a factor that you need to consider right off the bat. But let's say, for the purpose of this talk, right, we're going to be applying to multiple universities in different places. So I'm going to tell you what are the factors that I considered and what I strongly suggest you consider when deciding what colleges to apply to. So first and foremost, I think a lot of the time there are multiple factors that don't really make or break it, right? For me personally, I wanted to be in a urban or suburban location, and I wanted to have like I didn't really want a bustling city like New York or Chicago, but at the same time I didn't want like a really sleepy, quiet town, right? However, that wasn't necessarily a make or break for me, as I will explain later on. It was something that I was like, that would be nice, but it wasn't something that was a requirement for me. However, for a lot of you, I'm sure the cost and aid will be something that is a hard line that you cannot cross. If there are university options for you that charge more than you or your family or whoever is paying for your education are willing to pay, then understandably that those universities would not necessarily be feasible. So I think first and foremost, you should consider financial aid opportunities. Are these schools generous or stingy when it comes to financial aid? There's also broadly two types of financial aid that is provided by universities. There's need-based financial aid, which is in the case of and this would usually apply like if, for example, you are a United States citizen. If you can prove on your FAFSA or CSS application that you don't, that your family that makes like a certain amount of money that is below or above a certain threshold, you will be given a certain amount of need-based aid from your university or perhaps from the government. There's also merit aid, which is basically your university provides you with a scholarship based on things that you did in high school or during your application process that are worthy of being like financially awarded, I guess is how I would say it. There's like for example, in the previous talk, one of the panelists mentioned that in their country, you receive a specific amount of aid based on the grades you received in high school. So let's say you take the IB. If you receive a score of maybe 43 or above, then you're highly likely to receive aid from a university that offers merit-based aid. Things like that. So it could be about your test scores. It could be with regard to your grades. It could also be with regard to your extracurriculars. So in my case, as a Hesburgh USCO scholar, that is pertaining to leadership and extracurricular involvement. So right off the bat, I would suggest if you're looking for financial aid opportunities, and if you really are certain that you are going to need external aid when financing your education, I would suggest to try as much as possible to be the best student you can be. Take advantage of extracurriculars, keep your grades up, study hard for standardized testing if applicable. And I think that that's really important because even if your university does not provide need-based aid, if because you're not a citizen of that country, wherever you want to study abroad, they may provide merit-based aid, or you may qualify for external scholarships based on all of these efforts that you made to qualify for admission. So basically, I'm sure that if you have plans of studying abroad, you're really striving to be the best student you can be. You just need to keep doing all of those things, and there might be a possibility for you to receive merit aid. So 100%, I would suggest looking up universities that consider giving their students merit scholarships. Not all universities provide these. I would also suggest looking at universities that are need blind for international students. What does that mean? In the college application process, there are certain universities that will, like if you're not a resident of that country, if you're not a permanent citizen, they will consider your ability to pay as a factor in your admission. So there's some schools in the US where if, for example, you have the grades and you have the statistics, the numbers, the extracurriculars, the essays that are up to par with their admission, however, you demonstrate an inability to pay for your education, they may not offer you admission because they only have limited scholarship opportunities, and they know that if they admit you but they don't give you a scholarship, you won't be able to go. So that is something that you need to be aware of, whether or not the school is need blind or need aware for international students such as ourselves. It's also important for you to consider if a school is generous or stingy with their aid, specifically with regard to what kind of aid they provide. So maybe schools don't provide merit aid, but they do provide need-based aid, and you qualify for that because you fill out the CSS for the US schools, then that would be something that you could take advantage of. Additionally, if you're really, really passionate about a school or, a certain like caliber of institution, but you're not necessarily certain you can afford it, and these schools don't provide the kind of scholarships that you think you could get or that are attainable for you in your specific context, then consider external opportunities. These are scholarships provided not necessarily by the institution itself, but perhaps by parties such as the government or different companies. There's tons of different scholarship opportunities out there that are that you have to apply to. So like, for example, you write an essay and you will be considered when it comes to applying. So for me personally, for both the Hesburgh USCO and the Glenn Family Scholarship, the Glenn Scholarship is not financial, but for both of them, I went through an interview process, and then I did like an oral video interview where I recited my answers to different questions. So something like that. With different opportunities comes different modes of applying, and it's really important for you to research early on what are the universities that I need to apply for a scholarship to be considered? What are external scholarship opportunities that I may be able to take advantage of? Honestly, great resources for this are everywhere online. You can look for scholarship like competitions wherein if you win, then they'll donate like 5,000, 10,000, however many dollars, pesos, whatever, to your tuition fee. Um, for those of you who are interested in applying to the camp mentorship program, we do typically send out these kinds of announcements. We have a Discord server specifically for our mentees, wherein we send information like, oh, that there was, for example, last year the Coca-Cola scholarship, or scholarships specifically for people of a certain background. And lastly, in terms of cost and aid, affordability. When it comes down to it, there is no guarantee, unfortunately, that you will get a scholarship or that you will receive an offer for something or other, right? So I think first and foremost, and like the last also thing that you need to consider is, can you afford to attend this institution? Worst comes to worst, if you don't receive the opportunities that you were looking to receive, will they still be affordable? And I definitely think it's still worth taking a shot applying it to these universities because, like I said, external opportunities can come your way. But I think it's really important to consider so that you don't eventually get disappointed later on in the process. Next factor, campus life. I think for me personally, I was really, really excited about joining clubs and organizations at university. So I wanted to do, let's say, like for example, not me, but like let's say you want to do swimming, or maybe you want to be a tutor, stuff like that. You need to consider if that is available on your campus. And I think also when you consider campus life, it's a great thing to include in your essays, because a lot of schools are going to have the why us essay. Essentially, why do you want to apply to that university? What makes it special from other universities? And for this, campus life is a great thing to mention, because if you say things like, oh, like the weather is pleasant and like it's nice that it's in California, that's cool, then that's true about the school. But there are literally hundreds of other institutions at which that criteria is also applicable. So doing a deep dive into campus life not only helps you choose, is this really an institution that I want to apply to, but it will also help you learn more about the institution that you can show in your essays and your greater application. Social life is also really important. If you are not enthusiastic about Greek life, for example, that's something you would need to consider. I know a lot of like my friends personally, they were like, I don't want to go to a school where I would have to join a sorority for my social life to be like at its peak or at its height or whatever, right? So that's something you can consider. It's also something, for example, with like European universities, the partying or like clubbing culture may be different, like relative to Hong Kong universities, right? So that's definitely something that you should either research or ask students there, because they have experience firsthand. Facilities are also really important. If you, or I guess like greater architecture of the school is like something that I was personally looking out for. I have a specific vibe I really like, and I really wanted like a beautiful campus. So that's something I considered. And events, is your school like really fun? Do they have a lot of stuff going on? Or would you prefer like a more quiet experience that allows you to focus on your extracurriculars or the things that you personally want to do, instead of joining in with everyone else who isn't necessarily tailored to your own personal interests? Community is also really important. For this, I would strongly suggest to look at diversity and inclusion. What does that mean? A lot of schools, especially in countries wherein it's not culturally diverse, are going to end up being homogenous as well. If you go to a school in the middle of America, in a like a very white county or town, chances are that school is also going to be very white, though you would need to do research on that by yourself, right? But I think that diversity and inclusion are very important, because being the only like person of color or the only person of your background can, one, feel very alienating. It's very difficult to be the only Filipino in a room. You won't feel like you have that connection to other people, and you might feel like the odd one out, which will make you uncomfortable. And two, I think that finding a community of people of color, or not even people of color, but maybe people who are culturally diverse, really helps you find a network of people that you can connect with and that you can bond with. And also, it's very important to have, if that's something you're looking for, to have a diverse set of minds for you to be able to interact with. Me personally, I wanted a school that did have diversity. I wanted to be, because I do like fundamentally believe that different people have different experiences, meaning they would have different knowledge. So if you go to a school that is very homogenous, this like it might happen such that everyone there is super diverse ideologically, but I think chances are that a more diverse school would have a lot of ideological diversity as well, so you'd be able to talk and enjoy the company of other people who know about culture, and you'll be able to learn from them a lot more as well. And same thing with international students. Is there a huge international student community? Are you going to be an odd one out? This not necessarily a deal breaker for a lot of people, but I think it's nice to have a Filipino community or even a Southeast Asian or Asian community for you to be able to bond with when you get there. And career. When we say career, we're looking at things like internships, job placement, on campus work, and career advising with regard to your university. So, does your university offer opportunities for you to have an internship, like in your junior year? Is your school like a feeder with regard to top companies, stuff like that? You really need to look at, does your school place well into different careers? And for that, you would need to take a lot of you need to do a lot of research. But I think one thing that you can definitely consider that is like tangible and very clear is, what do students say about career and like educational or academic advising at your university? So personally, for me, I wanted a university that gave you lots of mentorship and advice. There are, like, for example, universities that have like a center for advising, and like at Notre Dame, we have a center like not even just for advising, but specifically for first year advising. So like just first years. And then there's like departments where like, oh, I want to get a job in financial technologies, or I want to get a job in business, stuff like that. There, you should be looking for opportunities at your university for you to be able to explore. Again, all of these things, not only is this good to research so that you have a clear and cohesive college list, but it's also really important for you to know, because it will be very beneficial for you to include that in your application to demonstrate that you are aware of the university in that way, that you are passionate and excited about attending that school. So I will move on to the next factors to consider. But again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A. You can ask anonymously, or you can also message or email me after. That's fine. But yeah, I will like 100% entertain questions if we have any. So next factors, I would definitely suggest to look at location. So first, look at relative to, actually before this, I would put like continent, because like vaguely schools in the same continent will have like a vaguely similar culture. It's not always the case, but like European schools, for example, are more similar than compared, like the US and the UK are not as similar compared to like going to school in the UK and France, something like that. Although there are completely different systems, I think it's still something that is worth looking at. Then you can look at the country. So relative to that specific country, what is the culture like? Here, in the country part, you can look at things like requirements. So like visa requirements, or even like cultural at this level, that's where you can look. Then region. Region is basically, that will tell you a lot about like the climate of the place, whether that be like the actual climate, like weather, or even like the political climate or the social climate of the region. Like, what are the norms? What's the culture like? And then last level, we have like the city or town, or like the specific niche that your university occupies. So for that will help you understand like what's the social life like at the town, at the city. And I think this is really important, because this is the place that you're going to be spending a lot of your time, right? Like if you research what's the nightlife like in the US, it really depends from city to city. But what is the nightlife like in like New York City, right? That is something that's a lot more nuanced. And if you can get as specific as possible to your university, that's great. For things relative to location, that would be things such as safety, weather, like whether it's suburban or urban or rural or like open or closed, stuff like that. So if you are like me and you super love the cold, then I would suggest looking at universities where it's not like it's like cool all year, something like that, right? Like that may interest you. Or if you're somebody who can't stand the cold, then I would suggest like looking in like the opposite direction, right? And for sure, I wouldn't say to pick your university solely based on whether it snows or not in December, but I will say that it's a nice thing to also consider just so that you can be prepared once you do get there. Because I know a lot of people like apply to universities in Europe or in the US. And then when they were admitted and during the summer leading up to it, one of their huge concerns was like, how am I going to survive the snow and stuff like that? It seems like a really small concern for some people, but for a lot of people, it's a huge thing. Like, never seen snow before. Like, you don't know how you're going to get to class every day, like freezing cold. So I think that's something that you can consider. Next, we have requirements. So you need to consider requirements like relative to testing. So standardized testing or English proficiency are two examples. Standardized testing and English proficiency, or like testing in general, can be grouped into three categories at universities. So there's required, optional, and not considered. So for required testing, some universities until now require the SAT and the ACT as like in the US and even in other countries, this is used as a metric of admission. For example, if you're applying to LaSalle in the Philippines, while it is not necessarily required, it is considered. Therefore, it's optional. And you can submit your SAT score in place of taking the DCAT. So 100%, if you have even like a slight inkling that you intend to study abroad, specifically in the US, I would strongly suggest taking the SAT. It was extremely helpful for me personally when applying to universities, not only there, but also here, right? And if you don't like your score, then choose schools that don't require it or go test optional and don't submit it. So for like required testing, that's like schools that will require you to have an SAT or ACT or an English proficiency test. And then there's schools where it's optional, where you can submit it if you feel like it will be a benefit to your application, but it's not required. So some schools will allow you to submit your SAT scores, but they won't necessarily require you to submit them, if that makes sense. And for test optional, basically, you just don't submit it. Like I don't know how else I can explain that other than you don't send them the score. It's not automatically sent for most testing services. Or in your application, there will be a box saying something like don't consider test scores in my application. I would strongly suggest like taking the SAT just because one, you really never know like if that score is going to be an asset to your application. For me personally, I will like fully be honest, I did not get the score I wanted. I wasn't like a 1500 or anything like that. I did not get a great score. So for me, I didn't submit my test scores to like top universities because I was scared that they wouldn't admit me. But for Notre Dame, I did accidentally submit my score because I was sending it to like all my safety schools because it's like a good score for a safety school. I accidentally sent it to Notre Dame. And they still admitted me. So I think like just try to be realistic about your score. And also, again, it's super helpful for Filipino universities because you have things, I believe, as far as I know, LaSalle and UST both accept the SAT in place of their admissions test. And the like metric for like how good your SAT is very low in the Philippines. So for LaSalle, it was something like I'm not sure. But it was something like because they were using the old SAT, but it was something like, oh, if you get like a 1200 or a 1300, you don't have to take the DCAT, which is like a pretty like if you study enough for the SAT, you are going to get a score around that range or even higher. Same with UST. I believe they required like around a 1200, although they required like additional like fees and whatever. But basically, if you don't want to be prioritizing your study abroad applications while simultaneously having to study for every single like LSAT, DCAT, ASAT, OPCAT, if you don't want to be studying for all of those whilst doing these, it's good to not be able to knock two of them out and use the SAT. And I believe other universities allow it, accept it as well. So definitely check that out. And for English proficiency, it can also be used. So if your school requires you to take like TOEFL or IELTS, they may waive that requirement if one, you get a certain score in the SAT, or two, and I think a lot of people don't take advantage of this. if your school's medium of instruction is English. So I know so many people who took the TOEFL or IELTS and turned out it wasn't really necessary, because it ended up being that some of us, like, we submitted from like ICA, because I went to ICA. ICA gave us like these, like, if you request it, they'll give you a certificate that says the medium of instruction at this institution is English, therefore our students know English. So that testing requirement could be waived, which is great. Less like hassle, less cost. I think that's great. Visa requirements are also really important to look out for. This is like a huge thing for a lot of international students that becomes problematic. So definitely research this. And like was aforementioned earlier, work opportunities. So are you going to be able to work on campus? Do you want to work on campus? Do you want to work outside of campus, etc.? The requirements of that, like relative to the specific place that you're applying to, are really important to consider. And lastly, academics. So what are the class sizes like? Is it seminar style, lab, lecture? Me personally, I wanted smaller classes, which is one of the things that motivated me to apply for the Glenn Honors Program at Notre Dame, which basically is like, instead of taking some big classes, like the introductory classes in like a bigger setting with like 200 people, you take it in a small group with 20. So that's the kind of thing that I wanted when I was looking at class size. I didn't want to be in a huge class. I wanted to really get to know my professors on a personal level. And I thought that it would be easier for me to pay attention if the class was small, because I know like the professor's staring at me or looking at me or whatever, right? Then there's also professors, like that's something really important to consider. And when you research professors, you could stumble upon amazing opportunities. So for example, I have a friend who was interested in applying to a specific university. I believe it was Tufts, and they wanted to go to Tufts, and they were doing research about professors, and they found a professor who had really specifically matched academic interests. So what they did is they emailed the professor asking, "Hey, do you accept high school students like to research with you in your lab or whatever?" And they got to do that. So not only is that an amazing extracurricular, that is fantastic demonstrated interest. That is telling a school like, I worked with this professor who works here, who works at your university, and who teaches here. Therefore, like, I'm very interested, right? Because it's so easy for you to say, "Oh, I'm interested in this college because I love this part of Asia. I love the country that it's in." But it's another thing entirely for you to say, "I worked with a professor who, or like, I know the work of this professor because I studied, their work," stuff like that. And even though you might not get like a research opportunity, stuff that I did in my application that you could totally do, I researched specific professors and I read their work, and then I would incorporate like an aspect of that. So for example, I would say like, I really want to work at the lab of Professor Blank because I'm extremely interested in how, like, for example, like this affects that, like scientific research, right? So that's something you can totally consider. Next, academic fit. So I think this is really important because some schools just don't offer some majors. If, for example, you want to go to a school wherein you're going to have like a direct route to med school or law school, choose a school that has a pre-med program or a pre-law program, as opposed to universities that don't offer these things at all. It's still possible to go to law school or med school without these courses or credentials, but it's a lot easier to be able to have these placements afterwards when the specific academic area that you are looking to major in or specialize in is already available at your university. Instead of having to make like a cocktail of majors and subjects and whatever, it's better to just be able to go there and like your certain major and that's it, right? And lastly, your program. I would definitely say that like, don't just look at ranking when you're picking a school 100%. But I will say that program rankings are definitely a lot more important compared to just the rankings of the school, right? Because your school could be a top 20 institution, but it could be notorious for having an awful math program. Or similarly, on the flip side, your school might not even be a top 50 school, but it has a top 10 computer science program. So it's super important for you to consider. And I would say that if you're going to be blinded by like prestige or rankings in any way, let it be in this regard and not like relative to the whole school, right? So now the question of prestige. I know that a lot of people really, really consider prestige, and I totally get it. I think not only is it a matter of I want people to know what school I'm going to, but it's also like you want to feel like what you did amounts to a tangible like level of respect or whatever, right? And that's totally understandable. But I think it's really important to consider everything else when you're deciding your college list, because 100% there are going to be schools that people don't really know the name of, that people aren't familiar with, but it could be the perfect fit for you. And there are things like there are factors to consider that are going to help you and be specific to your interests. But prestige is a blanket benefit that doesn't necessarily benefit you in a specific way. Like, sure, if somebody sees, if like an employer sees, okay, this person went to Harvard, hired. Like, I don't necessarily think that happens. And I think it's much more impressive for you to demonstrate that you thrived in the specific setting that you chose for yourself. If you go to a specific university and you take full advantage of their internship opportunities, of the classes, of the professors, of the career advising, that will demonstrate more than any level of prestige that you were a good fit for that school and that you made the best that you could with what you were given. And that is a great opportunity in and of itself. So 100%, I would say, like, don't be blinded by prestige, but I do know that a lot of people consider it, and I think it is like I won't tell you not to consider it, because me personally, like, I definitely consider the prestige of the institutions I applied to. It's just a matter of don't let yourself be blinded by prestige, if that makes sense. Tips and tricks. Now I'm moving on to advice that I have for formulating a college list. So, one, organization is key. It is the most important thing, not only with being organized with your applications, but also you need to be organized because you need to know when things are due. I'm going to show you the guys in the next slide a sample application tracker. It's so important for you to know, okay, I need to submit this by this date, this by that date, etc. Right? You need to know those things. Online software are really helpful for this. If you're a pen and paper type of person, like, huge respect. I haven't picked up a pen in like 4 months. But I will say that it's a lot more convenient having a Google Drive, a Notion, a Google Sheet, stuff like that, just because you can access it from wherever, whenever. I think that's really beneficial when it comes to the application process, because you're going to find at some point you're going to be filling out applications in school, you're going to be filling them out like when you're out in the car, at home, stuff like that. It's really important to have that easily accessible to you. And it's important to be organized with regard to your deadlines and also your materials, right? So I would suggest to have like specific folders and all of that. If you guys need any tips on organization or whatever, I'm sure that you can find some like during the conference, but also, again, feel free to ask. Second, I would say to be prepared for both the worst and the best case scenarios, right? Because being prepared for the worst case scenario is a given, right? Let's say you don't get into any of the universities you wanted. That is why it's super important to have really strong safeties. Like, if you don't think that you can even get, like, let's say it's a safety school for like people in the US. If you don't think you can even be admitted to that, if you still don't view that as a safety, it's still a target for you. Look at safeties nationally. Look at safeties in the Philippines that you can fall back on. You need to make sure that you have a backup plan in order to ensure that you don't end up one day like completely stranded and not knowing what to do. But also be prepared for the best case. A lot of people genuinely have such a hard time like accepting that the best case scenario did happen to them. I have friends who were admitted to like their dream universities and stuff like that. And then it ended up that they were like, okay, how am I gonna pay for this? What am I gonna do there? Like stuff like that. Because they spent so much time like idolizing and dreaming about that school, but they didn't really know what to do afterwards. And they were like really panicking, and the pressure was so high because everyone else going to that school is like a high achiever, right? So for sure, I would suggest to be as prepared as you can be relative to any scenario that could possibly take place. 3, be realistic, but also be hopeful. It's really important for you to be realistic about your personal profile during the application process. And I know this is very difficult for some because it's hard. Like, for example, you think that your stats are below average. You think that you're not like a strong student, but you honestly could be a very strong student. It's just that you don't know that because everyone around you is also high achiever. Similarly, you might think that you're a shoo-in for certain universities, but you're actually not, because the people the other people who are applying have even better like stats and extracurriculars despite yours already being excellent. So it's really important for you to be realistic. And I think for this, it's definitely great to consult external parties. I wouldn't say to consult your parents just because parents, they have a tendency to like, they really think like, oh yeah, either like, oh my God, my kid is amazing, like you can do no wrong, you're perfect, or like they're constantly critical about, your chances, whatever that may be. Your parents or your loved ones, your relatives are, I think they may be too personally invested in your college application journey for them to be able to give reliable, answers to any of your questions. I also think it's important to be hopeful. You need to have and maintain a certain level of idealism, because if you are just like, okay, I'm only going to apply to schools that I'm 100% going to get into, then you are 100% missing those opportunities that you're not taking. Me personally, you'll see later on, I categorized Notre Dame as a target for me because I really didn't have the best grades. I had like several Bs, like a C or two in high school, and I wasn't perfect. And I thought that that would be a deal breaker. And it was for a lot of top universities I applied to and I didn't receive admission to. But it's important to be hopeful in that regard because they, like these universities, could see something else in you entirely. 4, do your research and stay on top of it. Like I mentioned earlier, it's important not only to research the institutions that you're attending, but it's important to constantly be aware of these requirements. You need to be aware of deadlines. Like, what if they shift? Or essay prompts. So what if they shift? What if they change from year to year? Stuff like that. So for sure, be aware of that. 5, don't be afraid to ask questions. 100%, I would suggest reaching out to current students at the universities you are interested in applying to. A lot of my friends did this, and it ended up being an invaluable resource. They got application help from these students. They learned about university life once they were admitted. And also, again, they were able to include this in their application. They were able to say things like, my conversations with students at the University of blah, blah, blah allowed me to have a greater insight, blah, 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 into this. And that's how I decided to join this, etc. It's really great to have that link from you to somebody at that university. 6, take a shot on the seemingly impossible. I think it's really a good idea to have like 1 or 2 schools where you're like, okay, no way I'm going to get into those, because I have friends who are like, no way I'm going to get into that school. And they did, right? So I think if you can afford it, not only financially, but like mentally, and like if you have the time, take a shot on your dream, or like the dream of your dream, right? And see what happens. For all you know, it could be good. The worst thing that can happen is they say no and you don't get to go, and you wouldn't get to go anyway if you didn't apply. Lastly, 100% be open to new opportunities. Me personally, I had like a very, very clear and like solid decision of what I wanted from my university applications. I wanted to go to a specific school. I wanted to be able to do this major. I wanted to have this job after graduation. I was the kind of person who had a 5-year plan. The thing with that is that it kind of blinded me to new opportunities, and I never would have been able to experience all of the amazing things that I did because I took a shot on a school that I wasn't necessarily like firmly decided on. I didn't apply to Notre Dame restricted early action. I applied regular decision, but it ended up being that because I took a shot on this university, even though I didn't gain admission to other top universities, I was still able to choose Notre Dame. And not only was I able to go, I got 2 scholarships. I was able to visit the school and learn, like, it's such an amazing place. And it's really something that I wanted to do and I wanted to go to ultimately after that whole process. So 100%, I would say it's great to have a dream school, or it's great to have like a dream scenario, right? Wherein you are being given certain opportunities, because 100% that will help you be motivated. But I think 100% also allow yourself to embrace new opportunities and be open to what that might mean. Oops. And then I have a sample colleges. So this is just the colleges that I used. So right here, you can see the name of the school, location, country. Then I had the type. So like reach, dream, etc. Then I had the application round, school, and my intended major. So this is just the kind of thing like I would 100% suggest that you add like these factors to that list, which I did. This is just like a shortened version, honestly, so that it could fit on the Canva. And then a sample tracker. Here, basically, I had a master Google sheet for my college applications with different like pages. And then what I would do is like, here's the name of the school, then the application round. Okay, so these two I did early application, which means that it's June, November 1. That means it's June, November 30. So I was able to periodically look back and forth at this and learn, okay, this is what I want. This is what I want. This is what I want to be able to submit by. Therefore, like this deadline is looming. I should prioritize this application like that. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you all so much. There's like one question. I guess I have time for this. After you have started finalizing your college list, what are the most important factors in considering? Oh, okay, we have more. I will try to be as fast as possible. In considering which colleges to apply for ED1 and ED2. Great question. Ultimately, 100% for ED, I would suggest applying to schools that one are like as great of a match as possible to the factors that you have decided you want. So if you want a certain location, a certain academic program, etc., apply to the early decision schools that are harder to get into and that are a really good match for you. Because early decision for most universities, it is more likely that you'll receive admission. It's a smaller pool of people who are willing to have that like early, who are willing to apply early decision, right? So 100%, I would say if it's like your dream school or your top choice, apply early decision. But also if it's the kind of school, you really need to make sure that you're willing to commit, because again, with early decision, you have to go there if you get in. So just that's a factor I would say to consider. Ultimately, again, one, your top factors, like your deal breakers, and the difficulty of the school. If the school is super difficult and if it is a really great match for you, apply ED. Second question, I'm currently a rising senior, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is like quite a long question. Feel free to message me and I will like be happy to talk to you about this. And lastly, will we get a copy of the slides? There will be a video posted to Camp social media. But if you want a copy of like just the slides, as well as like maybe a sample college master sheet, mine wasn't the most organized, but I'd be happy to send it regardless. So again, feel free to reach out. I'm at Maya Tuviera on Instagram. I'm also Maya Tuviera on Facebook, and mtdeviera at nd.edu is my Notre Dame email. So that's all. Again, this is the camp team's social media. Thank you guys so much for listening to my talk. I really hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. With that, I'll pass it back to the camp team. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Maya. So on behalf of CAM's 2023 facilitation team, big thank you for imparting with us your wisdom and personal experiences that will surely aid everyone in creating their college list. We are deeply grateful for your time and effort in preparing and conveying this amazing session. A round of applause naman to thank Maya. So yet another session has come to an end, so you may now collect your badges. A link will be sent to the chat box and you can go ahead and open it to get this session's badge. Now, I'm sure that everyone learned a lot from the first 3 sessions, but today's fun doesn't stop